that's the problem is there.
Is your microphone on?
The microphone is on today. Yes, I started with it on. And it's 9:30. That's when we start, right? So in theory, I'll let it do the thingy. All my kids are at my house except Tana. She's going off to. We're here. I'm here.
So no class next week.
Next week, right? Sorry. I don't know, where am I going to be? Oh, I'm going to be in Iowa. The boot next week. But I'll be back the week after that. Okay, so it's time. And I was saying that we're getting near the end, but not there yet. So at some point, we're going to need to think about another thing to study. So if you guys are still interested in this kind of class, and we can make up something and, you know, move along. I'm always interested in translating, especially Greek. I can do a little bit of Old Testament too for or redo if we need one. But in any case, we have Jesus who has the big deal for John, and I think the most important point that John wants to make is he says, what else? He's answering what else to the Greeks and the Romans especially. But if you didn't happen to notice, there is also this very strong point of fulfilling, we say it, fulfilling the scripture. He says, filling the grafton to capacity, filling what was written to capacity. And the point of that is, I think, multifold. This is the reason we think that John is more Hebrew or Hebrew-based gospel than the others, but I don't think it is. I think maybe the most Hebrew-based gospel could be Mark or Matthew, but John gets this feeling to us. But I think John is trying to appeal to a multi-audience. He is, of course, he's Hebrew, but yet he's writing to the Romans and the Greeks. What else? And at the same time, he's tying in. Now, why do you think he would want to tie in to the Septuagint, especially? What do you think the big deal for that is? How does that affect our audience? I'll give you a hint. If it's Greeks and Romans,
they were impressed with the history.
That is absolutely correct. The Greek, you see this in Greek writing, and you see this not so much in the Roman writing, but the Romans didn't think they needed to repeat stuff at all. But the Greeks, you see it over and over again, talking about how the Hebrews, as a people, had all this history and all this writing that went back, to potentially to 4,000 years BC. Depending on whose timeline you're using, it's 2,500 to 4,000. And then even before that, if you include the creation and other events. But the whole point of this is that the Greeks were impressed because their history really starts with Thermopylae, and with the 100 that weren't really 100, the 100 Spartans that really weren't 100 Spartans, right? But the Spartans wrote it, so the Spartans are going to give themselves credit and not the 300. What are the other Thebans? Who were, I think, 300 Thebans, and then the Athenians were also fighting, but they don't count because it was 100 Spartans that were on the bridge, right? But in any case, that's really when their history with Hippocrates. Anyway, the two earliest histories that they wrote. Everything else is myth. Herodotus. Yeah, Herodotus.
Hippocrates was the doctor, right?
The doctor. But Herodotus and Thermopylae, the guys who wrote the earliest histories in Greek, but the Greeks acknowledged the histories of the Hebrew people. And so if you ever wonder why was the Septuagint thought to be such a great piece of writing? Well, it's Greek, but it translates the Hebrew documents. So the Greeks, do you see what your audience, who's buying this stuff, right? Who wants it? It's not just the Hebrews. It's not just the Jewish people. It's the Greeks. It's the Romans. They thought that this was important stuff. And so when John appeals, see, I am really irritated with modern education, especially in the universities. Because like I said, if you go to Friends, Newman, I don't care where you go and you ask for a class in history, what are they going to use for the historical basis of the first century? Josephus. They use Josephus. That's all you'll get is Josephus. And if you say, well, why don't you use the New Testament documents? And they'll say, oh, they're religious documents. They're not historical documents. And yet we know, I prove in every class they're historical documents. They're the best historical documents. Why don't you use a third rate or literally a third level, third order, first order, second order, third order historical document, which has no real proof text in history. Meanwhile, we have John, who is using Septuagint in the Greek, because all the quotes in the New Testament documents are from the Septuagint. And he is talking about how it's fulfilling that writing to individual capacity. He's talking about how it's fulfilling. We call it fulfilling the prophecies, or fulfilling the writings about Christ that are in the Old Testament and the Apocrypha. You never forget those. So, I would like to go back. I wish we could go back educationally to the time when people actually used real historical documents to study history, because it doesn't happen anymore. They're using third order sources, third person sources for everything. That's why when you go to a history class today, they won't hand you Josephus. They won't hand you LXX. They won't hand you the Gospels. They'll hand you a history, right? The history, which is something that a professor wrote and said, oh, I've consolidated everything you need to know. You don't need to read the first person or second person sources. I've got it for you. Anyway, we are looking at a first person source. John, he was there. He saw it. And so this is his specific first person look, address, record of what was occurring. And so it's astounding. We get Jesus Christ, he died. We talked about fulfilling the prophecies, fulfilling the scripture, fulfilling the graphia. And then we have this, 1938. Later, Joseph Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Christ, but secretly because he feared the Jewish leaders. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. That's what the NIV says. Ooh, it's way long, isn't it? It's kind of a long piece. And after that, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, besought Pilate they might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him leave. He came therefore and took the body of Jesus. This is a very interesting verse and interesting person. It's first we hear about Joseph of Arimathea, with or in company with, but these made an earnest request by someone on a special footing to the Pilate, Joseph, the away from Arimathea, being a learner, a disciple of Jesus. He had been concealed, but through a fear of the Judeans, in order that he might lift up the body, the physical body, the soma of Jesus, and transfer the Pilate. He has come or gone, certainly or accordingly, and lifted up the soma, the physical body of him. Here's the translation. But in company with these, Joseph from Arimathea, being a learner, disciple of Jesus, but he had been concealed through fear of the Judeans, made an earnest request to Pilate in order that he might lift up the physical body of Jesus. And Pilate transferred. Accordingly, he, Joseph, has come and lifted up the physical body of him. There is a lot in this verse that we basically, as we look at the Greek, we can see it. But I'm going to go over Joseph of Arimathea in a second. But what is really important, I think, that is just obvious in here is, number one, you can ask yourself the question, how did Joseph of Arimathea, how was he able to make an earnest request by someone on a special footing to Pilate? We're guessing this guy was part of the Sanhedrin, right? Maybe. If he's Sanhedrin, he's got to be a Sadducee. I mean, there's only 4 Pharisees, and it would tell us if they were, right? So he's got to be a Sadducee, not a Pharisee, and we're going to see he's with a Pharisee. Maybe he was a Pharisee. We don't know. But if you look at this, what is interesting, number one, he's a disciple of Jesus. So he's listed right with the 12. No, he's not. You know, I keep telling you, there's a whole bunch of these guys, right? There's bunches. We just don't know who their names are. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, it'd be kind of ironic if he was a Sadducee, taking Jesus, who was resurrected, and the Sadducees don't believe in that.
Well, and especially this. Look what it says. Remember, okay. Yeah, we know it, right? But to us, when we say, let's say your body. Say your body. We're presuming you're alive. So, you know, your body, in our sense, includes sarx, suke, and pneuma. Well, I don't know. Who knows what people, nobody knows what they believe anymore, right? If you ask a college student, well, what makes up a human? They can't even define what a woman is. They're not going to be able to define what a human being is. I mean, you're asking way too much. Just like artificial intelligence. Everybody's talking about it. If you were talking about it for class, look, there is no artificial intelligence. We're not even close. There's nothing even that meets the measure. But if we call it intelligence long enough, someone might believe it, right? Look at what they say here. What Joseph of Arimathea requested was Jesus' soma. His soma, his physical body. If we say body, we don't know alive, dead, you know, you have to qualify. But in the Greek sense, you got soma, suke, pneuma. Remember what happened on the cross? The last thing Jesus did, he gave up his pneuma, specifically. Now, you might ask the question, where's the suke? Modern science, I think the Greeks would probably say this. They would probably say suke ends, you know, when you die, because but it's not part of the physical body in their mind. Thoughts, emotions are not part of the physical body. So what happens to suke? I don't know. We never talk about that, ever. But yet, we know pneuma, spirit, soul. We know soma. Really interesting that he asked, number one, he's able to talk to Pilate directly, and number two, he takes the soma, the physical body of Jesus. Direct Greek. Okay? Although what we say, right? Okay? Like I said, to us, body is body, right? Take away the body of Jesus. Presumption he's dead, but, you know, and yes, he has died. He gave up his pneuma. But again, to me, this is a really important point. Here is the best we know of Arimathea. All right, doesn't want to show it very well. This is my biggest complaint for Microsoft products. You see where this is marked right here? This is supposed to be the historical Arimathea. It's north of Jerusalem, further than Bethany. But the problem with Arimathea, this is just really interesting. Arimathea, a town in ancient Judea, at the time home of Joseph of Arimathea, famous for donating his own tomb to bury Jesus after his crucifixion. Its exact location remains uncertain and subject to debate. It's sometimes associated with the biblical site of Ramathema Zophim, or the modern day towns like Rentis. I also think it's interesting, Arimathea mentioned in all four gospel accounts, which state that Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy, respected man, likely a secret disciple, that's silly, likely he was, it says he was, asked Pilate for Jesus' body to bury in the new tomb. And here's just a little more information. I didn't qualify this information. This is generally correct. Historical location is uncertain. Describes the city of Judea. In Luke's gospel, some scholars suggest the same place, birthplace of the prophet Samuel. Other traditions have identified with modern towns as Rentis, Ramallah, Bet-Rima. It's interesting, Ramallah, isn't it a place, the chosen, where that girl that gets killed?
Her name is
Rama? But didn't she come from, I thought she came from Ramallah or something like that. Yeah, something, yeah. Anyway, for some reason I was thinking about that or remembering it. Anyway, I want to mention this just because you may hear this. I think that this is, the name Arimathea has been interpreted by some as a pun. I don't think it's a pun. There really is a place that we know was called Arimathea historically. But Arimathea means best disciple in Greek. Aristos Mathetes, being disciple town. So Arimathea, the name of the town, means the place of the disciples. So I think this is important. I don't think John, I think, we know it is a real place. So Joseph of Arimathea, but do you see the irony that would make the Greeks and the Romans chuckle with this? Joseph from the town of disciples, or Joseph, the best disciple, took the body of Jesus, asked for the body of Jesus. There is an irony in that, right? Or not an irony necessarily, but a hidden message, right? Who's the best disciple? Oh, Peter. No, he denied Christ 3 times or more. John, he was kind of hidey. We're going to see John even more hidey. What about Thomas? Oh, he was doubting. What about other disciples, right? But yet we have one disciple who's willing to go to Pilate and ask for Jesus' body and give a tomb and put him in the tomb.
That was pretty brave to go to Pilate and ask for that at that point, given what was going on.
I think you're right.
If you were a religious leader or whatever, you'd be kind of putting a bullseye on your back. And I don't know if he touched the body. It didn't say that, but you're not supposed to touch a dead body before, because then you couldn't participate, right? You'd be unclean.
Bingo. And matter of fact, it says he lifted him up.
It says in the next, 2 verses later, right?
Yeah.
That they took hold of.
Well, and I think, especially, you're right on money.
So it's probably why he's not easily forgotten. Right? I don't know.
Can you do the
That's a
Passover?
pretty big compromise if you're somebody and you're Jewish.
In Centurion, the novel, I wrote about this thing, I took all this. And the big deal was that Joseph, Arimathea, and Nicodemus, who we're going to get to, could not participate in the Passover because they touched. But the answer, in what I told in my book, is they said, we have had our Passover because we killed the Passover lamb, and therefore that Passover was for all Jerusalem, which is what I think is the big deal here. I make that statement more than once. What we need to realize is that Jesus, no kidding, was the Passover lamb, and that therefore they did have a Passover. Even though, okay, I'm going to go back. I didn't qualify this in this because it's not as important to John as it is to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we know that the sun stopped shining at 12 o'clock approximately when Jesus died. Anyway, at 12 o'clock, the sun stopped shining. Well, when the sun stopped shining, what could they not know? The time of day. And the sacrifices can't be done at dark. The sacrifices had to be started at a certain time. And I believe it's 2 o'clock. But when they did have a water clock in the temple. And so according to, if you pull the accounts together, and I mentioned this in the book Centurion, they apparently started the sacrifices on time, but when it was dark. And also, there was an account by Josephus and another author that is, third person or third order. So we don't know if it's really factual or not, but that it was said that the high priest, when he did the first lamb, messed it up. So he messed up the first sacrifice, which means he was supposed to redo the sacrifice and start over again, right? But he didn't. He just continued. And so the way they did it, the trachs, they had 3 trachs of 3, groupings of sacrifices. The first was for the priests and the priests' families, the Sadducees. The second one was for the Pharisees and their families. And the third was for the common people, for the Passover lambs. Of course, the one would be the latest. Well, if they started late and it was dark, and there's a question of the sacrifice, do you think they got the sacrifices of the people completed before sunset? Yes, sir.
And wouldn't the curtain being torn from top to bottom also kind of throw them a little twist in their whole?
Bingo, because in the other accounts, not in this account, but the other accounts, because John didn't think it was necessary. It was already in the other accounts, right? So John doesn't need to tell you this. But when Christ died, according to the other gospel accounts, the curtain, in the Holy of Holies place, right, was ripped in 2, which exposed the Holy of Holies to the world. And, we talked about, when we talked about Mark, was the Holy Spirit coming out or going in? Was that the Spirit of Jesus going in? Was the Holy Spirit coming out? Was it God coming out, right? Well, they're all the same. But you see that it's very interesting the way that it's written in the Greek and in the accounts. But they did have a sacrifice. It was Christ. And the irony in this, that the other accounts give us, this one doesn't. And I really shouldn't be mixing the accounts, but it's okay. It's all of interest to us, right? But the fact that the people most likely did not have a Passover. There was no Passover because the lambs couldn't be sacrificed. The ones who had the Passover were the priests and maybe the Pharisees. But maybe even the Pharisees didn't get it. And I believe there is an account someplace, Josephus or something about this happening. But Joseph of Arimathea's, we'll see, right? He can't have a Passover because he touched a dead body. Well, anyway, he was what's that?
The Old Testament, where it's talking about being buried in another person's tomb or something, didn't really mention that. The Old Testament prophecy goes along with the tomb.
Yeah, I don't think I have that as a, because it wasn't a quote, but I should have had that as an allusion, but I don't remember it being a specific allusion addressed to John. But yeah, I think there is a Old Testament thing that mentions that. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Now here we're going to get to the point. Now, we can discuss this. Oh, this is long, so there's got to be more to it, right? And there came also Nicodemus, which first came by Jesus by night and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100-pound weight. Came or went, and Nicodemus, he having come or gone forward to him of night, to the firstly, he bearing or carrying a compound of myrrh and aloes, which how litros, Roman pounds, about 12 ounces, a hectaton, 100. So it's interesting that our translators, especially in, in the King James, we get 100-pound weight, which is cool, Roman pounds, right? Our NIV translates it for us and fixes it to 75 pounds. What's the difference? The difference is that the Roman pound was about 12 ounces. Our pound is approximately 16 ounces, but you know it's not an equal kind of measure. But the weight was 100 Roman pounds. Interesting. And Nicodemus came, he having come firstly forward to him Jesus of night, he bearing a compound of myrrh and aloes, which have 100 Roman pounds. So, I haven't calculated the weights. Oh, I'm supposed to calculate the weights. Just generally about 12 ounces. You know, we use 16 for ounces for our measure. Anyway, what's
I
it?
have a question. I mean, maybe you probably didn't prepare, but this answer to this. But why did the women go to the tomb to prepare Jesus' body if it's already done?
They didn't. In the Centurion, I addressed this, but they apparently didn't know or didn't see. And by the way, they were going to prepare for.
Well, the women went to prepare for Passover.
They went to prepare for Passover, and this is the Shabbat. So, what are you not supposed to be doing on Shabbat after darkness? And moving. Yeah, yes, sir.
Well, but the women would have already participated in the Passover with Jesus before. Why would they be going to prepare for it again?
Well, that's okay. This is a very interesting question. I think I can answer this. It may or may not make you. It may or may not. You know how answers are, right? In my opinion, historical answers. All I can do is give you the historical facts, and then you make up your mind. Does that answer your question? Almost all the time with historical facts, unless we have something that specifically gives us the complete answer, we can't be certain, right? But for this question, why? Okay. Essenes and Essenes. You got Essenes, you got Essenes. I've kind of mentioned, and I've said it more than once, Jesus appears to be an Essene. One of the reasons that the New Testament documents don't mention Essenes at all is probably because they are. Yeah, a lot of them are. It mentions Pharisees, Sadducees, it mentions Zealots, it mentions teen hodos, even though they are teen hodos, but it's a new thing, right? But it doesn't talk much about Essenes. Now, if you're an Essene, let's say you're an Essene, and you're living in Masada, so you'd have your Passover at the proper time, right? And you're good. Except you got a little problem. What can you not legally do at Masada?
Sacrifice.
You can't sacrifice. So you have a little
So
issue.
yeah, where were Jesus and the disciples getting the lamb to eat on Thursday? I never really thought about that.
A good kosher butcher.
Yeah, good. Well, a good kosher butcher is an option, or you went to the temple. But the problem is, if you had it sacrificed in the temple, where did you eat the Thanksgiving sacrifice? In the temple. Yeah, you couldn't take it home. They didn't give you the box, right? They take it home in your box, right? No, that didn't work. It's no way because you ate it, right? So, yeah, you got a problem here. And this is a ways from Masada and Essene. So, I suspect to get their lamb, remember, this is the fight. This is the huge fight that we ignore, right? We talked about it in Hebrews. I tried to get it to you. I tried to beat it over your head because I think it's really important. Hebrews, I think, was in Alexandria. And Alexandria had a temple. The temple was illegal. It was sacrificing. In Hebrews, the writer tells the people not to eat meat sacrificed in that temple. he also tells them not to eat meat sacrificed to idols. What did Paul say? Paul said it's okay as long as it doesn't cause your neighbor to stumble and it doesn't cause an issue in the church. That's his big deal. So Paul was of the mind that you could eat meat sacrificed to idols because you were worshiping God through it. Now, we don't even equate anymore having a grill out, a cookout with sacrifice. But every culture in the world until the modern era would say, if you're eating meat, you are eating a sacrifice. Even the Pope said that, because up to even the modern era, what were the animals you could not eat on Friday? You could eat fish because fish was not considered a sacrificial animal. So even to then, the mind of the people, the Christians, was on this. So I think what happened is they did not have a, quote, what would be considered a proper Passover, but Jesus wanted to have the Passover what? On the time that the Torah said you should do it, the Essenes did the same. Now, whether Jesus is an Essene or not, or the disciples were Essenes, they followed the Torah. So however they did it, right? But then you still, okay, let's say you're an Essene and you're living in Jerusalem. What are you going to do in Passover? You're going to do that. You're going to participate in the Passover. There's two reasons for this. Number one, there are different times when Christmas is almost always the 25th, right? But what's that?
Almost always.
Well, it's always supposed to be the 25th, but Orthodox holds a different day.
Oh, yeah, that's true. The Orthodox do that,
right?
Yeah.
The different Christians hold different, things. Do you think they still open presents on the 25th? If they're in America, I bet they do, because their kids are expecting it. Everybody's expecting it. Do they have trees? Yeah, even though it's not part of their. What you do is you do what is culturally acceptable. Now, today they don't kill you for not doing that, right? But in Athens, in Jerusalem, what do you think would happen to a person that didn't do the Passover lamb, that didn't mark their doorposts if they were known to be Jewish or Judeans, right? What would happen? They'd be ostracized from their society on the minimum. They might not be able to buy or sell in the marketplace. At the worst, an angry mob might come and try to harm them, right? If you were a Gentile, or if you're not a Jewish person, they mostly ignored you. But we know historically, I know I'm repeating myself, but historically, we know that enclaves, like in Athens, for example, they permitted the Jews to do stuff to be excluded many times from certain festivals. However, in other cities, we know they didn't exclude them. So if you're a Jewish person living, let's say, in Thebes or Sparta or whatever, right? What did they expect you to do when they had the festivals to the gods? Participate. The Pythagoreans, when they didn't do that, what did they do to them? They killed them. They wiped out the Pythagoreans as a whole sect, a mysterion, because they did not follow the festivals of the Greek people. So, it's not a happy situation.
So you think they maybe didn't have lamb when Jesus and the disciples were doing the Last Supper?
No, I think they did, but it wasn't a Passover lamb unless they illegally had it sacrificed.
Right. But so then you're saying, nobody gets meat outside the sacrificial system, basically. So how did they get it? Where did they get it? Where is it from?
Generally, people couldn't afford meat outside sacrificial system, but if you had the money.
Oh, and Jesus did have some patrons. He had some.
And if you're the only
People
one
taking
cooking
care of
meat,
them.
everybody'd be like, "Where's that coming from?"
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So
We know historically, when we say meat, the average person, we're talking about the average person,
But
right?
since they were Jewish and celebrating the Passover, they wouldn't want to be doing that with just like any old meat that they bought. It would need to be sacrificed, right? So I haven't gotten all the way through season 5 of The Chosen,
Yeah.
but so maybe you know, but the part as far as I've gotten, like they are talking about the bitter herbs and the breaking matzah, but I'm not sure. Did they have any lamb there? Did they portray any lamb
They
there?
didn't show it.
Because I think lamb has not been part of that for so long, 2,000 years, that people maybe are having a historically inaccurate view, thinking that's the way it always was.
I would not disagree with your statement. However, let me tell you I know what they do today. The Jewish people today do not eat lamb at the Passover.
Right.
Not a bit. What they do is they put a lamb shank, a bone, on the plate to represent the Passover lamb. Now, what do the Messianic Jews do? They eat lamb. The Messianic Jews hold to the New Testament and the Old Testament. In the New Testament, what does Paul say?
Have meat.
Yeah. Today we don't, today we sacrifice everything to idols, but that theoretically we do not sacrifice meat to idols in most countries, that some countries actually do, but in the United States we don't, as far as I know. I mean, some Islamic communities may do that. They do sacrifice. Halal is considered that. But you can have a kosher butcher prepare you a lamb, which is what Messianic Jews do, because they usually hold a kosher. But they have lamb at their Passover Seder's.
So, the bottom line is we don't know how Jesus and the disciples got their lamb for the Last Supper.
I suspect they did it the way everybody got the meat that they got on their tables that was not from the sacrifice, which is not the average guy. But if you have money and patrons, if you have the ability, they would do it. And the Essene community wasn't necessarily rich, but we see who's in it. Sanhedrin members, right? Jesus had Sanhedrin dudes. Look at Nicodemus.
Well, and didn't he have Joanna too, and other women who were taking care of him?
Joanna is, I don't disagree that Joanna is mentioned, I think, in the New Testament someplace, but Joanna is not, most of what we know about Joanna is traditional, but it's cool. And
it says in Luke, I just looked up her name real quick to see where it would pop up.
What did it say, Luke?
And it said women, it's under the heading Women Accompanying Jesus in Luke 8. And he has Mary Magdalene and also Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their means. So we do know Joanna was kind of a high up, and that he had some women providing for him.
Yeah, I'm just saying what we know about her, about the Chosen. I think,
right. Of course, there's a lot of extra, but
yeah, I love what they did with it because I think they're right. But I didn't even mention a lot of the side stuff in my book, because it was more about the Legion anyway. But the point is, yes, you're asking wonderful questions. This is going to even get better because, John is what else, but there's more in this. So taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices and strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. This is really cool. Oh, it's longer than what we have. They took the body of Jesus, wound it in linen clothes with spices as the manner of the Jews is to bury. And okay, I'll give you this. Well, let's see what it says in the Greek first. They take hold of, certainly accordingly, the body of Jesus, and they tied it in bonds, in pieces of fine linen, with or accompanied with the spices, just as an unwritten custom, the ethos, an unwritten custom, behavior based on tradition, fixed by the religious social life of a nation, is to the Judeans to prepare a body for burial. So here's what it says in the translation. Accordingly, they take hold of the physical body of Jesus and they tied it in bonds and pieces of fine linen in company with the spices, just as an unwritten custom is to the Judeans to prepare a body for burial. This is a big deal. Now, in our traditions, in our translations, we get, as the manner of the Jews is to bury. It says in NIV, it's a custom. It's very specific that this is not a normal. This is a normal thing, but it is not a. It's an unwritten custom. It's not Torah. It's not Tanakh. It's not anything that's required. It's the way it is. But also, you said they touched him. I agree. The Greek is very specific. Now, they could have had, remember, servants, slaves, people working with them. But the author, number one, there may have been 20 people, 50 people, 100 people coming with Joseph, Arimathea, or Nicodemus. But it was unimportant for John to tell us this. What was important, according to John, is that they took hold of the physical body of Jesus, which gives you the impression they did what?
They were actually ministering.
They were doing it. It could have been just two guys, which is totally possible, right? May have had more, may have had some slaves, may have some helpers, but I think the Greek is telling us that they, no kidding, did it. They touched him, they prepared him, they made it right. And you say, why were the ladies not there? The ladies were gone because it was night, it was dark, the Shabbat had already started, the Passover had already started, they were going home. And, a couple of guys can probably get away with hanging around, right? Especially if they're higher level officials. But the ladies are going to have a problem because they're expected to, it's like Thanksgiving. Maybe you've got a guy in your house that helps make the turkey. But in my house, in almost all the houses I know, the ladies are making sure that you know that they're making the best stuff ever, right? And so they are in the kitchen, from dawn to dusk, making the best stuff ever. It's so good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But I'm just saying that, in societies and cultures, you have responsibilities. And the ladies' responsibility, number one, what is the number one thing why the ladies have to be home for Shabbat?
Only they can light the candles.
That's right. They're the only ones who can light the candles for Shabbat, the mitzvah for Shabbat, bringing Shabbat in. Without them, there is no Shabbat. And we're guessing without them, there's no Passover. Yes, sir.
The other thing is, since the Pharisees and Sadducees were so concerned about what Jesus had said, and I don't know if they had put it together yet, but the Romans were guarding the tomb. I mean, they wouldn't have just left it alone if they were there guarding it on the third day, when they then they're guarding it immediately, accompanying the Nicodemus and Joseph.
The impression we get from the other Gospels, and I don't think John talks about it at all, but in the other Gospels, the impression we get is that they went to, after Jesus was entombed, they went to Pilate and said, he said he might do this, we need to guard against it, blah, blah, blah. Maybe Nicodemus was yakking, maybe Joseph or he was yakking, somebody's talking, right? And so they decided to add that in, yeah?
Matthew 27, they talk about Jesus. He talks about Jesus being buried, Joseph of Arimathea, and so on. And it does say right there, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there sitting opposite the tomb. So they did know that his body was prepared and put there. But then it says the next day, that is after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "So remember how the impostor said, well, he was still alive. After 3 days I will rise. Therefore order the tomb to be made secure," etc. So it was the next Saturday.
Okay.
Well, your presumption is that they are close. And I would gather that based on, we're not looking at the Matthew account, but if we looked at the Matthew account in Greek, we'd probably know more about where they were, where they saw, and where they could do it. I am not countering the fact that they might have been in the vicinity, but number one, they may not have seen the preparation. We don't know where the preparation occurred. Was it in the tomb? Was it outside the tomb? Was it, under the cross? Where was it? They don't tell us. So they may not have seen, the actual thing. And if they're far enough away, they might see them going to the tomb or followed along behind them, but may not have seen the preparation. So I don't think it's a historical issue about them not knowing. And John gives us a totally different account, but his fulfilling the holes is what I think is a really cool deal. Let's see. Yeah. But I think, like I said, the most important point of this is that it's an unwritten custom. And here's the point. Okay, the only reason to state about the Jewish custom to this audience is because it's not a Jewish audience, right? In general, it's not a Jewish audience. The other thing is, this is a custom that came from Egypt. Period. The Hebrews embalmed the body following some of the practices they learned during their times in Egypt. They didn't fully embalm or mummify, right, the way the Egyptians did, but they were doing a very Egyptian kind of thing. Their philosophies were different, but what is interesting to us, should be interesting to us, is there are proof texts based on the fact that Jesus was, prepared for burial, right? And the preparation for burial was very similar to the mummification process they learned in Egypt. They would have never gotten there if they had not gone to Egypt. There's nobody else that does this, right? You don't read about this, right? The Syrians, right? The Parthians, the Greeks, no. The Romans, no. Nobody, no other cultures do this except the Egyptian culture and the Hebrew culture even come close to this kind of stuff. We don't do it, right? When we prepare somebody from burial, we'll embalm them, but that's kind of a modern process. I mean, it's not like anyone was embalmed up to the invention of formaldehyde, and even then it was like, it's like linen, right? They embalm linen, but they say it was getting a little green, after 100 years or so, until they finally dumped them because it was kind of getting gross. Anyway, so this is really, I think, an important and interesting thing. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and the garden is a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. That's NIV, King James. Now, in the place where he was crucified was a garden, and the garden a new sepulchre wherein was never a man yet laid. But into the spot, the topo, whatever where was fenced with stakes, a garden, and into the garden, a sepulchral monument, new in quality, in who, which, or what, not even yet, not even one, was placed. But into the spot, where was fenced with stakes, is a garden, and into the garden, a new in quality sepulchral monument, in which not even one, not even one, is placed. This is really, and I think we were talking about this in the sense of it being, in the Old Testament, and I don't think I have that illusion here, but what is important about this isn't what is important. We don't get what's important about this. How do they use tombs in this period and even today? You know how they use the tombs? A little bit. They do not everybody does it today, but it's traditional. What you do is you take the body and you put it in the middle of the tomb in the thing, and what's all around in the tomb? Little coffins. And what's in the coffins?
Oh, the ossuaries. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
The ossuaries with the bones of the previous people who had been in the tomb. Because what they do is they wrap the people up and they put them in the tomb and they put them in the center on the center thing. And what happens to their bodies? It decays until there's only bones. And then they take the bones and they put them in a miniature coffin, usually a ivory or a stone coffin, and they put them in the corner. What the author is telling us, that this tomb had no other bodies in it. That never had a body in it. This is a new tomb. In other words, had not been the process of decay or, and to us, this isn't important. Why do you think this is important in Hebrew, in Greek, and Roman thought? In Hebrew, thought's easy.
Cleanliness.
Cleanliness, yeah. Is that what you're going to say?
No, I was actually going to say, because it was prophesied that way as well, that he was buried in a tomb that no one else had ever laid in.
Well, even a concept of the prophecy is cleanliness. Because remember what I told you? Jesus took the excrement covered like sponge in his mouth with the vinegar, but it was on a hyssop branch. And so he took the uncleanliness of the world away. And he died, right? But the hyssop branch and the cleanness and the sacrifice, right? A sacrifice has to die. Wait, we got a problem here. You see the problem? When you go sacrifice your Passover or you sacrifice anything in the temple, what do you have to be doing? You're touching something dead. Oh, do you see this? This is so luscious, so perfect. So, the Greeks would say this is an irony. This is a real irony. To sacrifice for your sins and for your transgressions and for your life and thanksgiving, you have to kill. If you're killing, you're touching a dead thing. When you touch a dead thing, you are unclean. So what do you do? Go run the mikvah? No. Isn't that wild? So Jesus' body, by this, was kept clean. So the clean, it's perfect. It's clean. It's perfect sacrifice. That's the whole point of the Jewish and also the Greek and the Roman. Remember, the Greeks and the Romans, they would get really, the thing that really turned the Greeks and the Romans they got really upset about was that the Hebrews were sacrificing on an altar that was what? Enclosed within the temple area. Their altars are always outside of the temple. They sacrifice outside of a temple. So if you have a sacrifice inside of a temple, what do the Greeks and Romans say? That's an abomination. That's unclean. That you can't do that. That's why when they didn't destroy the temple in the apocryphal period in Maccabees, what they did is they destroyed the mezzocline. The mezzocline is the low wall around the temple. They destroyed it. When Herod rebuilt it, what did he do? He made the mezzocline huge, tall, a structure. Why? So it couldn't be destroyed again. Even though Herod was not a Jewish guy, he was an Edomite, he still recognized the importance of preventing that from happening. Now, I don't know, it's really hard to portray this, but can you see what the Greeks and Romans coming into the temple area would think the whole time? Yeah, it's an abomination. It's like, I don't know, putting a satanic, ornament on a Christmas tree, or, to them, it would just be desecration of desecrations. Probably the worst you could ever have, I don't know, like cooking steak in a Barbie. I don't know, whatever you think is really a horrible thing, for your eating and your sacrifice and your worship, they would consider that to be the worst of the worst of the worst. But, to us, we don't care. We don't know. Who cares, right? But yet Herod, okay, what was Herod doing to the Greeks and the Romans by doing that?
Sticky finger in their eye.
He is, yes, no kidding. And what's even funnier is he would have sacrifices for the emperor in the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the emperor is probably like, yeah, okay, that's cool, right? Because everybody's sacrificing for the emperor. But in Jerusalem, in an enclosed temple, an enclosed altar, and they're sacrificing within the temple.
But Jesus was sacrificed outside the law.
Outside the walls. I think that's a really good observation because it does a couple of things. Number one, it fulfills Scripture, but the thing that's really important about him being sacrificed outside the walls is who was he sacrificed for?
Oh.
Yeah, and you know what? The Greeks and the Romans got that. They really got that. That's part of the whole thing, our argument. Okay, today the argument's worthless. In the first century, the argument was really powerful. Because you went to your Greek and your Roman friends, you say, Jesus, the sacrifice for humanity was sacrificed outside the walls of Jerusalem, in the world. So he is a God for all. Today, whatever. We don't know. We don't care, right? Because it was a Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Which is interesting because we get the impression this was kind of planned, but they laid they laid Jesus, therefore, because Jews' preparation day for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. Thither, certainly accordingly, through to furnish the site, paraskuin, goods and vessels, the day of preparation for the Shabbat or feast of the Judeans, that or because near is the Memnon, the sepulchral monument, they placed to Jesus. Now, I think you can get a lot from this. It's really interesting. The most important thing that you can get from this is number one, accordingly, thither through to the furnish the side, the day of preparation of the Judeans belonging to Judea, because near is the sepulchral monument they placed to Jesus. I think that Joseph, Arimathea, and Nicodemus, and all the apostles and disciples thought that what would happen to Jesus on the cross? He'd hop right off. He'd beat up the Romans. He'd kick them out. It's like, that's it. Wash the land with their blood, and that's all. We're good. He died, and what did they have? No plan. They had no idea. They had no clue. The apostles, the disciples, I think the women were going to prepare the Passover. The men are hiding. They're doing whatever they do to prepare for the Passover the best they can. But they did, we said the Essenes already had their Passover. So were they preparing very hard? I don't know. It's hard to tell, right? I think they wanted to prepare for the Passover. They expected Jesus to come back. They're probably putting on their traveling clothes and their really good clothes because they're going. And then Jesus dies. And they're like, what are we going to do now? So they abandoned him. Remember what Jesus, I told you, Jesus was not praying that God would take the cup from him. Jesus was afraid that what would happen? His disciples would do what? Yeah, they'd abandon, they'd go. And you know what? It looks like they did. He had two that didn't. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Nicodemus, we know, is a Pharisee, says specifically. Joseph of Arimathea may have been a Pharisee. He was at least a Sadducee, probably a member of the Sanhedrin. We're not sure. We don't know. But he was, interesting. He came from the city of the disciples. But he was the disciple, whether it's a pun or not. I don't think it's a pun. I think it's a wonderful acclamation that he was the best disciple because he stood with Jesus at his death and took his body that would prevent him from being clean and doing the sacrifice and doing the Passover. And he and Nicodemus put him into it. And, you know, the ladies were watching, but what were the ladies not willing to do? What was the ladies' disciples, apostles, not willing to do?
Make themselves unclean, or
They were unwilling to become unclean to take care of Jesus' remains. I don't think they were prepared. They didn't have their action plan, right? They didn't have their checklist and action plan. When Jesus dies, we need to do this. We need to call the mortuary. We need to, you know, right? They had no clue. But Joseph Arimathea, the best, I think it's beautiful, the best disciple, stood up with Nicodemus. They took care of the whole matter. And by the way, we're at a perfect time because the next one is 20. And not next week. Next week, I'll be gone, but the week after next, we'll do a synopsis of 19, and then we'll get into 20, which is the resurrection, which, you know, the stuff we uncover, I think, at every turn in this, you know, it's, the Greeks are telling us all kinds of stuff that for some reason our translators, I don't think they're intentionally burying it, but they're making it more, what would you call it, legible, understandable for us, or whatever, easier for us to kind of gather, right? And maybe, I don't know, I think the Greek is really cool because it tells us so much in detail about the things that we want to know. You know, John is telling the Greeks and the Romans, what else? And I think we get what else just by looking at the Greek and seeing, you know, that they held him, they touched him, they, you know, the specifics of the points. And we're going to see even more in the resurrection because there's all kinds of cool hidden, not hidden. They're out in the open in the Greek, but they're not in the translation. If you really want a translation, the translator would have to really describe it to you in a different sense, and I think we'll see that. Thank you, Father, for your word. I pray you look at this week. In your name we pray.
You know, we know that there were more than just the 12 in the upper room.
Yeah.
So it's entirely possible that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea were there and participated in the Passover event.
I don't